The most dangerous lies in a marriage are not the dramatic ones. They are not the lies that require elaborate stories, fake tears, or desperate improvisation. Those lies often collapse under their own weight. The dangerous ones are quieter. They are the lies that arrive dressed as calm. The ones that make your concern sound excessive and your instincts sound undisciplined. The person looks you in the eye, tells you everything is fine, and says it with such measured certainty that you begin questioning whether your discomfort is a flaw in you rather than evidence of something shifting in them. That is how trust gets turned against decent people. Not all at once, but by degrees. The husband notices distance. He asks carefully. She says the marriage is fine. He notices late nights. She says work is intense. He notices her tone sharpening around ordinary questions. She says he is reading too much in distress. Eventually, if he is not careful, he starts participating in the lie by apologizing for what his own eyes have already begun to understand. That was nearly my story. What saved me was not anger. It was timing. By the time I found out why my wife stopped coming home early, I had already begun to see something larger than infidelity. I saw how arrogance works inside love. It does not simply betray you. It studies what kind of man you are, decides which of your virtues can be used as skelta, and then dares you to remain as patient as you used to be. My name is Mitchell. I was 45 when my marriage ended, though like most honest endings, the legal one came after the real one. I live outside Denver, and at the time this happened I worked as director of facilities planning for a regional healthcare network. It is the kind of job that trains you to respect structure, budgets, timelines, contractors, compliance, inspections, hidden risk. I spent my days thinking about what can fail quietly inside a system before the failure becomes public enough for everyone else to care. I was good at that work. I still am. What I was not as good at, apparently, was applying that same discipline to my own home before pride and decency interfered. I had been married to my wife, Dana, for 13 years. No children. That absence sat inside the marriage like a room nobody wanted to walk into without a flashlight. We had talked about kids early on, then later, then more vaguely, then less often, then almost never. Life kept providing respectable excuses. For career, my hours, timing, money, until money was no longer a convincing reason. Then habit. That is the problem with postponing emotional truths. Eventually the postponement itself becomes part of the architecture, and once something hardens into architecture, people begin furnishing around it instead of asking whether it should still be there. Dana worked in pharmaceutical sales, which meant travel, lunches, district meetings, physician events, and a great deal of polished personal energy directed at people she might never think about again once the contract closed. She was good at it. Better than good. She understood how to make someone feel specially seen without ever becoming fully available to them. When we met, I found that attractive. She seemed bright, warm, socially quick. I was the steadier one, the one who preferred ordered conversation and clean commitments. She made life feel lighter, or maybe more alive is a better word. That is often how these pairings begin. One person confuses steadiness for security. The other confuses brightness for depth. Sometimes both are partly right. Sometimes both are eventually punished for what they mistook. From the outside, our life looked stable. Nice house. Good neighborhood. 2 solid careers. Thoughtful vacations, decent furniture, enough shared friends to maintain the appearance of a living social marriage without having to become extroverts about it. We hosted twice a year. Remembered birthdays. Sent flowers when appropriate. Showed up to weddings looking like people who had solved adulthood with enough grace to reassure everyone else. That matters because public competence buys a lot of private silence. People trust surfaces more than they should. If I criticize myself honestly, which I believe a man must do if he intends to tell the truth about someone else, my main blind spot was that I thought my restraint protected me from becoming the kind of husband who gets fooled. I took pride in being measured. I did not like scenes. I did not like jealous energy. I thought if something felt wrong, the mature response was to observe longer, ask cleanly, and avoid turning uncertainty into accusation. That instinct still has value, but without boundaries it becomes a gift to the wrong person. Dana learned very early that I would rather question my interpretation than force her to defend hers. I thought that made me respectful. Over time, it simply made me easier to manage. The first changes were subtle enough that I felt foolish even attaching meaning to them. She started coming home later, but in her line of work, late dinners and physician events weren't unusual. What changed first was not the schedule. It was the emotional residue of it. She used to come home and tell stories. Not long ones but textured ones. The doctor who thought he was charming. The district manager who treated every meeting like a sermon. The client lunch that turned into an accidental comedy of egos. Then those details started disappearing. Her answers became summaries. How was the dinner? Lying. How did the district review go? Fine. Everything okay? Of course. Nothing suspicious there, taken individually. But marriage is not made of isolated answers. It is made of patterns of access. Once someone stops bringing the actual texture of the life home, the home is already being demoted. Then the tone shifted. That mattered more than anything else. Dana became easier to annoy around normal questions. If I asked whether she thought she'd be home in time for dinner, she might say, I already told you it depends. If I asked whether we should confirm plans with my sister for Sunday, she'd exhale and say, "Why does everything have to become a logistical operation with you?" Those are small lines, but contempt almost always enters through small lines first. It has to. Bigger disrespect would demand a reaction. Smaller disrespect trains you out of one. I tried to address it before suspicion had a name. One evening I found her in the kitchen standing over her laptop, still in heels, eating pretzels out of a bowl like she was too tired for the idea of a real meal. "You've seemed somewhere else for a while," I said. She did not look up at first. "What does that mean?" "It means you're here, but you're not really here." She finally lifted her head, and I saw that expression I would come to know too well, not confusion, not concern, but the faint disappointment of someone already preparing to downgrade what you're about to say. "I'm tired," she said. "I know. This feels like more than tired." Then came the question that sounds harmless until you've heard it enough times under the run conditions. "What exactly are you asking me?" Not, "What are you feeling?" Not, "What have you noticed?" "What exactly are you asking me?" The challenge dressed as clarification. "I'm asking if we're okay." She leaned back against the counter. "Mitchell, we're adults. Not every stressful month means the marriage is in trouble." I didn't say trouble. "No," she said. "But you do this thing where if I'm stretched thin, you start making it emotionally symbolic." That line bothered me because it didn't reassure me. It corrected me. She was not denying the distance. She was framing my response to it as the actual imbalance. That is one of the most efficient manipulations in intimate life. Once a person starts defending the right to feel uneasy, they are already less dangerous to the liar. I let it go, and that was my error. Not because I should have become suspicious then. Because I should have respected the fact that my discomfort was being answered with management rather than truth. The first name that entered the house too often was Carter. He was, according to Dana, a regional market access rep assigned temporarily to support several large accounts in her territory. "Smart," she said. "A little smug. Good with hospital administrators." He came up just enough to become normal and never enough to become vivid. Carter said this. Carter handled that. Carter was in town another day. Carter had relationships at one of the major hospital groups. That is a pattern I understand much better now. Hidden people are often introduced in a blur. Not concealed, just softened. Enough presence to make their existence unremarkable, not enough detail to make their importance emotionally real. The first genuine jolt came on a Thursday. I had gotten home early after a site work fell through because a contractor had misread the permit window. Dana texted that she'd be late because of a district-wrap dinner at a steakhouse downtown. Around 7:30 I realized she had forgotten her Apple Watch on the bathroom counter. The screen lit up with a message preview while I was shaving. "Saved you a seat. Try to look less married tonight." No name because the watch only showed the number. I remember standing there with shaving cream still on one side of my face, staring at that one sentence and feeling something inside me go very still. Not angry yet. Cold. Like the room had finally stopped pretending to be warmer than it was. When she got home, I asked quietly, "Who told you to look less married?" She paused just long enough to offend me. Then she gave a little laugh. "What? Your watch lit up." She set her purse down more carefully than usual. "It was from Leslie. Leslie texts you to look less married." She was joking because I told her I was in one of my boring navy dresses again. From an unsaved number. She changed phones. "Mitchell." Then the familiar pivot. "Are you really doing this right now?" There it was. Not concern for what I'd seen, but concern that I might allow it meaning. "I'm asking because it matters." "No," she said, voice quieter now, almost injured. "You're asking because you saw one stupid text and decided to make yourself miserable." That line would have worked on me earlier in the marriage. Not because it was convincing, but because it played to one of my deeper fears, that I might be the kind of man who creates ugliness out of fragments. I said nothing after that. Not because I believed her, because I understood for the first time clearly enough to trust that my reaction was what she wanted access to. She knew how to handle uncertainty better than I did because she had designed the situation that created it. For about 2 weeks after that she became warmer. That is one of the details people outside these stories rarely understand. Sudden tenderness after suspicion is not always relief. Sometimes it is maintenance. She asked more about my day, touched my arm in passing, suggested we take a weekend in Santa Fe after this quarter finally stops chewing me up. She initiated sex twice in a week after months of relative detachment. Years earlier I would have read that as reconnection. By then it felt too timed, too aware of the need to soften the perimeter before I asked better questions. Still, I did not have enough to act on, at least not enough for the kind of action I knew I would eventually have to take. So I watched. That is a part of the story people often misunderstand when they hear it. Watching is not passivity if you are using the time to understand structure. It becomes passivity only when you are still hoping your silence alone will fix what someone else has already decided to damage. I started noticing practical things. Her mileage reimbursements on weeks she claimed to be stuck in dense local territory did not make sense. The dinner that supposedly ran until 10 somehow produced a fuel stop near a hotel district 2 exits away from where she said she'd been. She began coming home without her ring, then reappearing from the bathroom wearing it again. Once, on a Saturday morning when she was supposedly heading to a district planning breakfast, I watched her back the car into the driveway before leaving. She had never backed in before. That seems minor until you realize it positioned the passenger side away from the kitchen window. Small details matter because contempt usually shows itself first in what someone stops bothering to hide coherently. The actual discovery came through an anniversary gift receipt. It was in the side pocket of her car, folded inside a tissue from a boutique jeweler I knew well because I had bought her birthday earrings the 2 years earlier. We had no anniversary coming up, not for another 4 months. The receipt was recent. $870. Men's cufflinks custom engraving. I stared at it long enough that the tissue paper left lint on my hand. That is what finally moved the whole pattern from suspicion into certainty. Not because cufflinks prove an affair by themselves, but because they annihilated the last decent explanation available to me. Dana did not buy gifts like that for work colleagues. She did not buy gifts for me without discussing the budget. And whatever version of Carter she had been normalizing into the house, he was now expensive enough to leave behind private evidence. That night, after she was asleep, I opened the laptop she used for expense reports. There was nothing sloppy in the obvious sense, but secrecy always leaves seams. Deleted emails and trash, saved PDFs, calendar labels designed to survive a spouse's glance but not actual scrutiny. I found hotel confirmations tied to market development overnights. I found dinner reservations for 2 on evenings she claimed she was staying late because the district manager was in town. I found one photo attachment misfiled in a work folder. Per hand, a hotel bar table, men's cufflinks still in the store box, and a caption from Carter. Didn't know you noticed this much. That sentence sat in me like metal. Then I found the thread, archived under a woman's initials. Not full of declarations. That would have made it easier. It was adult, logisticals, and disgustingly calm. Taunting, travel windows, complaints about domestic predictability. One line from him read, "He's still buying all this." Her response was worse than anything else in the folder. Mitchell sees tension, but he always tries to explain it away first. That was a wound beneath a wound. Not just that she cheated. That she had accurately studied the best part of my temperament, my reluctance to become crude, suspicious, unfair, and repurposed it as a shield. I copied everything and met with a lawyer named Joanna Feld the next morning. She asked me the practical questions first: assets, house, children, timelines. Then she asked the only one that really mattered. Do you want to save this marriage? No. Do you want to confront her now? No. But do you want? I answered honestly. I want to stop being used as the decent half of her lie. That became the principle the next month. I gathered documents, copied accounts, opened a private checking account, secured temporary housing with a colleague who rented a small carriage house behind his property. I moved paperwork first, then personal valuables, then the things I knew I would need if the house became emotionally contaminated too quickly to think clearly in. I also stayed calm, not because I was performing strength, because by then there was nothing emotional left to negotiate. Dana did not know that. She mistook my quiet for lingering pliability. In fact, she became more openly dismissive during those weeks, which told me her internal confidence had returned. She believed the danger had passed. One night, while changing for another temporary late dinner, she looked at me in the mirror and said, "You know what your problem is." I said nothing. You need closure before life has actually decided what it's doing. That line would have sounded meaningless to anyone else. To me, it sounded like contempt so practiced it had become philosophy. I looked at her reflection and said, no. My problem was confusing your calm with honesty. She turned then. What's that supposed to mean? It means the marriage stopped being fine a long time before you stopped saying it was. She stared at me, but not long enough. Arrogant people often look at danger directly without truly recognizing it because they are still using the old map. The turning point came 3 days later when she canceled dinner with my sister and her husband for the 3rd time in 2 months. Not because of the dinner itself, but because of what I learned next. My sister called me afterward, irritated on my behalf, and told me she'd just seen Dana downtown an hour earlier with some man in a tan coat while I had been at work. My sister is not dramatic. She is annoyingly precise. If she said she saw Dana, then she saw Dana. I did not need that sighting emotionally, but it confirmed something important structurally. The lie had grown social. Once other people begin tripping over your spouse's secret life by accident, the hidden world is no longer hidden. It is simply being subsidized by your silence. I chose to confront her at home privately, but not impulsively. I sent her a text saying, "We need to talk tonight." No room for interpretation, no hint of what I knew. When she came in, she was already defensive. "What now?" she asked, dropping her keys into the bowl by the door. I was sitting at the dining table. The folder was in front of me. "This," I said, and slid the anniversary gift receipt across the table. She stared at it, then at me. For 1 second, her face was completely unguarded. That single second told me more than tears ever could have. Then came the sequence. "Where did you get that? You went through my things. This is insane. You don't understand what you're looking at." I let her get halfway through the performance before I placed the hotel confirmations, the photo, and the message transcript beside it. Then I said, "I understand exactly what I'm looking at. What you haven't understood is that I stopped needing your explanation." That was a power reversal. Not volume, not rage, just the end of her ability to define reality in the room. She cried. She said the usual things. Lonely, unseen, work stress, feeling disconnected, needing attention, confused. Human beings are predictable when cornered by their own evidence. They reach for emotional weather as if weather itself absolves design. I listened. Then I said the only thing I really needed to say. You didn't just betray me. You built a whole version of me in your mind that made betrayal feel safe, that landed harder than anything else because it was true. She asked if I was leaving. I placed the carriage house key on the table. I already did, I said. This is just the part you get to see. That was not victory. It was sequence. The visible ending had finally caught up to the internal one. The divorce was neither dramatic nor easy. It was expensive, bureaucratic, and emotionally exacting in the ordinary adult way. The house was sold. Assets divided. Friends sorted themselves quietly, as people do when they realize proximity to a couple no longer grants them neutrality. Carter disappeared quickly, which told me what those relationships usually reveal once exposed to daylight. Secrecy had been part of the attraction, not just a logistical inconvenience. What stayed with me afterward was not anger. It was education. I learned that lies become most dangerous when paired with a betrayed person's best qualities. My patience, my fairness, my refusal to be crude, those things had all been turned into cover. That is why I no longer romanticize emotional restraint automatically. Restraint is only noble when it protects something worthy. Otherwise, it is just unpaid labor for someone else's deception. I also learned something about respect. Love can survive fatigue, grief, even certain disappointments for a while. But once respect goes, everything else starts rotting faster than the couple wants to admit. Dana did not stop coming home early because of work. She stopped because home had ceased to feel morally central to her. The late nights were not the cause. They were evidence. About a year after the divorce, I saw her in a hotel lobby in Phoenix during a facilities conference. She looked good, put together, controlled, still very much the sort of woman a room would make way for without understanding why. She said, "You look well." I said, "I'm clearer." That word seemed to strike her more than anger would have. Then she asked, "Do you still think I never loved you?" I took a second before answering. "No," I said. "I think you loved me as long as respect felt inexpensive." That was the truth, or close enough to it. So if there is a message in this story, it is not that late nights always mean betrayal or that receipts are more trustworthy than people. It is simpler. Never let someone train you to distrust your own perception just because they can remain calm while doing it. When a person keeps insisting the marriage is fine while steadily moving their real energy elsewhere, do not confuse your patience with moral obligation. Silence can be dignity, but it can also become the place where someone else hides their arrogance for too long. My wife said the marriage was fine. What I found out was that fine had simply become the word she used while deciding where she actually